These workers are being removed from this property, Fane. That is final.
That's not how this works. Not on private land.
The guard had his hand on Marcus's shoulder when I came around the corner of the barn. There were 4 of them, private security, black polos, radios clipped to their belts, standing in a loose semicircle around 3 of my ranch hands near the south fence line. My foreman, Dolores, stood off to the side with her arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the situation like she was deciding exactly how long she was going to let it continue before she did something about it. The woman giving orders was standing on the gravel lane just inside my property gate, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like she just stepped off a resort deck. Diane Whitmore, HOA board president, dressed for a country club, standing on a cattle ranch, pointing at my crew like she was directing traffic. "These individuals are trespassing," she announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They are to be escorted off this property pending an investigation by the association." I walked toward them at a normal pace. No running. No raised voice. "Diane," I said, "get your hands off my employee." She turned and looked at me with the patient expression of someone who believed she had already won. "Mr. Calloway, this ranch falls within the Clearwater Ranch Estate's HOA jurisdiction. These workers are operating without an approved contractor permit. Security is here to enforce the association's authority." One of the guards, young guy, nervous energy, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd been asked to do, glanced at me and then at the man standing beside Dolores. He was the one they hadn't gotten around to yet. Quiet, medium build, dark jacket, standing absolutely still with his hands relaxed at his sides, watching Diane with the calm, flat attention of someone who had seen a great deal worse than a clipboard-wielding HOA president on a Tuesday morning. His name was Roy Tanner. He was my ranch operations manager. He had worked for me for 11 months. What Diane Whitmore did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Roy Tanner spent 23 years as a United States Marshal before he retired and came to work for me. I looked at Roy. He gave me the faintest nod. I said, "Diane, I'm going to ask you one more time to have your people step back." She clicked her pen. "Mr. Calloway, I'm going to ask you to cooperate, or I'll be forced to contact local law enforcement too." "That'll be fine," Roy said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was easy, unhurried, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to carry weight. "I was going to call them myself. Let me back up and tell you how we got there. I bought the Clearwater property 4 years ago. 47 acres of mixed grazing land and timber in the hill country of central Texas, with a working barn, a 3-bedroom ranch house, and a seasonal creek that runs through the back quarter of the land. It had been a functioning cattle operation decades earlier and had sat mostly idle for years before I acquired it at auction. I paid cash. I had the deed. I had the title search. I had the survey. I had everything. What I also had, and what I did not fully appreciate at the time I purchased, was a homeowners association. I know how that sounds for a 47-acre ranch. But Clearwater Ranch Estates had been platted in the late 1990s as a planned rural residential community. A developer had carved it into large parcels, built a paved entrance road, put up a stone gate, added a community mailbox cluster, and written a set of CC and RS that applied to every lot regardless of how agricultural the parcel happened to be. Several of the neighboring parcels had homes on them. Mine did not. But I was bound by the documents just the same. For the first 2 years, I had no problems. I paid my annual dues, attended one board meeting out of curiosity, nodded politely at my neighbors, and went about building the operation back up, clearing overgrown fence lines, reseeding pasture, repairing the barn, and eventually bringing in a small working crew. Diane Whitmore became board president 18 months ago. Within 3 months of her election, I received my first violation notice. My tractor was parked too close to the shared entrance road. I moved it. Second notice, my hay storage structure was not an approved outbuilding design. I reviewed the CC and RS and confirmed it predated the current design guidelines. Third notice, my workers' trucks were parked on the gravel apron near the gate and were causing a visual disruption to community aesthetics. That one I ignored. The fourth notice arrived on a Friday afternoon, certified mail, informing me that I had 30 days to obtain HOA contractor approval for all ongoing ranch labor or face daily fines of $150 per unapproved worker. That was the first time I drove over to the county clerk's office and pulled every document associated with Clearwater Ranch Estates. The contractor approval rule was real. It was buried in a 2019 amendment to the original CC and RS, passed during a period when the community had apparently dealt with some construction disputes on a neighboring lot. The rule had been written for residential renovation contractors, plumbers, electricians, framers. Nobody had written agricultural labor into the exemption. Whether intentionally or through genuine oversight, my ranch hands were technically covered by its language. My attorney, a quiet, thorough woman named Patricia Voss who had handled the original property purchase, reviewed the amendment and confirmed it was likely enforceable as written, but also noted it had never been applied to agricultural operations before. She advised me to request a formal board hearing and make the case that ranch workers fell outside the rule's intended scope. I requested the hearing in writing. I sent it certified mail. I kept the receipt. The board scheduled a meeting for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I continued operating the ranch normally. I wasn't hiding anything. My crew was doing legitimate ranch work, repairing fence line, maintaining the barn, caring for the cattle I had started bringing in. None of it was residential construction. None of it was the kind of activity the amendment had been designed to regulate. 3 weeks before the scheduled hearing, Diane showed up at my gate with a clipboard and what she introduced as a courtesy inspection team. 2 men with her, neither of them official in any capacity. One was her husband, and the other appeared to be a neighbor she'd recruited. They walked the perimeter of my gate area, photographed my crew's vehicles, and took what she called documentation. I followed them the entire time, said nothing, and filmed every minute of it on my phone. The next day, I received a notice that the association had retained a private security firm, Meridian Property Services, to conduct weekly patrols of the community and enforce compliance with the contractor amendment. The letter stated that workers without approved credentials would be asked to leave and that law enforcement would be contacted if they refused. I called Patricia. Can she actually do that? I asked. She can hire private security, Patricia said. What those guards are authorized to do on private property is a different question. They have no more authority than any other private citizen. They cannot detain anyone. They cannot legally remove people from your property without your consent. If they try, it becomes an assault or false imprisonment issue. I wrote that down. I also called Roy into my kitchen that evening. Roy was ex-law enforcement, but more than that, he was methodical. He understood documentation, chain of custody, and what evidence actually needed to look like to hold up. I told him what was happening. I told him I wanted a record of everything, every time a guard set foot on my property, every communication from the HOA, every notice, every visit. Roy nodded slowly. You want a paper trail that leaves no room for interpretation. Exactly. He started the next morning. Every guard appearance logged by time, badge number if visible, and photo. Every verbal exchange noted. Dolores was instructed to do the same on her phone. Marcus and the other crew members were told clearly, if anyone approaches you on this property and asks you to leave, you do not leave. You find Roy or you find Dolores. You do not argue. You do not engage. You wait. 2 weeks later, the guards showed up for the first time. One of them, the nervous young man I would see again at the confrontation, knocked on the barn door while Marcus was working and told him he needed to see his contractor credentials. Marcus said he didn't have any because he worked for me. The guards said that wasn't sufficient. Marcus said he'd go get Roy. Roy came out, listened to the guard explain himself, thanked him politely, and asked him to provide written authorization from the property owner, meaning me, giving him or his employer permission to request credentials from workers on my land. The guard didn't have that. Then I'd suggest you wait outside the gate, Roy said, and have whoever retained your services send us something in writing. They left. I got a letter from Meridian Property Services 4 days later saying they had been retained by the HOA and had authority to operate within Clearwater Ranch Estate's common areas. My property was not a common area. That letter went directly into a folder that Patricia was now maintaining. Then the board hearing was quietly cancelled. No reschedule offered. Just a brief email saying the matter was under further review. That was when I understood this wasn't about contractor permits anymore. Patricia requested the board's meeting minutes for the previous 18 months. She also filed a formal request for all financial records related to the Meridian security contract, the cost, who authorized it, and whether it had been approved by the full board or unilaterally by Diane. Under the CC and RS, any expenditure above $5,000 required a full board vote with documented minutes. The Meridian contract, when we finally obtained it through a formal records demand, was valued at $2,400 per month. Over the 6 months it had been running before we obtained the records, that was $14,400. Not a single line about it appeared in any board meeting minutes. Patricia also discovered something else in the records. The contractor amendment vote in 2019, the amendment being used to target my crew, had passed with 3 votes. The board had 5 members at the time. Quorum required 4 members present. Only 3 had attended that meeting. The amendment had never been validly adopted. I sat with that for a moment when Patricia told me. So the entire thing they've been fining me over, I said slowly, was never actually a rule. Not a legally enforceable one, she said. Roy was in the room with me. He didn't say anything, but I noticed the corner of his mouth move slightly. We decided not to tip our hand yet. The board hearing had been cancelled. The guards were still showing up weekly. I wanted them to make one more move, one that was documented, witnessed, and unambiguous, before we responded publicly. They obliged on a Tuesday morning in early October. I had 6 crew members working that day, the largest group I'd had on the property at once. We were doing a significant fence repair along the south boundary, and Roy had brought in 2 additional workers from a neighboring property where a friend of his owned an operation. Diane must have seen the extra trucks and decided this was her moment. She arrived at 9:15 with all 4 Meridian guards and her clipboard. She instructed 2 of the guards to begin informing each crew member that they were in violation and needed to leave. The guard who'd had his hand on Marcus's shoulder had been following orders he didn't fully understand. I came around the barn corner and saw everything I described at the beginning of this story. Roy was still standing quietly to one side when I arrived. I gave him the nod. He reached into his jacket and produced his credentials, not his service weapon, not a badge in the law enforcement sense, but his federal identification, which he carried as a matter of habit and because he had consulting work that occasionally required it. United States Marshals Service. Retired, but the identification was legitimate and clearly issued. He held it open and addressed the guards directly, not Diane. I want to be clear, he said, that what's happening right now constitutes attempted unlawful detention of private workers on private property. You were retained by a homeowners association to patrol common areas. You are not on a common area. You were not invited onto this property. The people you are attempting to remove are employees of the property owner. You do not have legal authority to remove them, detain them, or demand their credentials. If you continue, you are personally liable. The nervous young guard stepped back from Marcus immediately. The other 3 looked at Diane. Diane looked at Roy's credentials. And for the first time since any of this had started, she said absolutely nothing. If you've ever watched someone get exactly what they deserved at exactly the right moment, if you've ever seen preparation and patience pay off in real time, you understand why moments like this matter. If that kind of accountability hits different to you, if you believe in documented evidence over bluster, in standing your ground when you've done nothing wrong, I'd ask you to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happened next, when Patricia's letter arrived and Roy made one phone call, that's where Diane's entire playbook fell apart completely. The guards left within 4 minutes. Diane stayed for approximately 30 seconds longer, then walked to her car without speaking. Roy took photographs of every vehicle, every person, the timestamp on his phone, and the position of each guard at the moment he'd produced his identification. The power had shifted. Diane just didn't know yet how completely. Patricia sent her letter to the HOA board, all 5 members, not just Diane, the following Monday morning. It was 41 pages. It documented the invalid contractor amendment, citing the specific quorum failure in the 2019 meeting minutes. It documented the unauthorized Meridian contract and the unilateral spending that violated the CC and RS own financial oversight provisions. It documented every guard appearance on my private property with photographs and timestamps. It included Roy's written account of the October incident, formatted the way a federal officer writes a report, precise, chronological, and completely free of interpretation. Patricia's letter requested the following within 30 days. Formal rescission of all fines issued under the invalid amendment, written acknowledgement that no contractor permit requirement applied to my agricultural operations, immediate termination of the Meridian contract, and a full accounting of HOA funds spent on the security arrangement. It also noted that if those requests were not addressed, we would be filing in civil court for reimbursement of fines paid, damages related to the October detention attempt, and legal fees. I learned most of what happened next from one of the other board members, a retired contractor named Earl who'd been on the board since before Diane's election and who had never been fully comfortable with how she'd been operating. Earl told me that when the other 4 board members read Patricia's letter, 2 of them had not known the Meridian contract existed. They believed Diane had mentioned a community safety initiative in a casual email chain but had not realized she'd actually signed a 6-month contract with a security firm using association funds without a vote. The emergency board meeting happened 8 days after Patricia's letter arrived. I was not there. I didn't need to be. Diane arrived prepared to defend herself. She brought her own notes, her clipboard, her printed photographs of my cruise trucks. She had apparently believed, right up until she walked into that meeting, that the weight of the board would back her. It did not. The quorum failure in the 2019 amendment was confirmed by the board's own review. Earl had gone back and checked the sign-in sheets himself. 2 board members formally moved to rescind the amendment. It passed 4-1. Diane cast the single dissenting vote. The Meridian contract was terminated for cause, meaning the HOA did not owe the remaining balance of the contract, and Meridian was notified that their guards had been deployed on private property without authorization. Every fine levied against me under the invalid amendment was reversed. The total was just under $3,000. I had not paid any of them. Patricia had advised me not to while we built the case, but the reversal meant the HOA was also barred from pursuing collection. Diane resigned from the board 12 days after the meeting. She submitted a 1-paragraph letter citing personal reasons. Earl told me she had also consulted with her own attorney and had been advised that her personal exposure in the October detention incident was not trivial. I never pursued her personally. What I cared about was the property. And the property was mine, cleanly and completely, the way it had been since the day I signed the deed. 3 weeks after the board meeting, a crew came out and removed the Meridian Security Company's padlock that had been attached to my gate, put there without my permission somewhere around week 2 of their patrols, in a move so brazen I still shake my head thinking about it. Roy supervised the removal himself, photographed it, and had the lock returned to Meridian's office by courier. Roy is still my ranch operations manager. He doesn't talk much about his federal career, and I don't ask. What I know is that the way he stood in that field in October, quiet, prepared, completely unintimidated, said everything that needed to be said. The south fence line is repaired. The cattle are doing well. My crew shows up every week without anyone questioning their right to be there. I think about what it took to get here, not the dramatic moments, but the boring ones. The certified mail receipts. The document requests. The folder Patricia kept. The logs Roy started the morning after I asked him to. The fight was won in those hours, not in the field. Before you leave, I want to ask you something and I genuinely want to know your answer. At what point would you have stopped trying to reason with the board and gone straight to legal action? Some people say wait, document, exhaust every option. Others say the moment someone puts a hand on your employee, the conversation is over. Where's your line? Drop it in the comments, because I read them, and in situations like this, real people's perspectives matter. Thanks for being here. Take care of your property, and take care of each other.